We'll figure it out. All right. So, Joni Greene. Joni and I met actually during the last total solar eclipse when we were both in near Bloomington, Indiana. And Joni Greene has had her head in the stars since the age of 5, when her father introduced her to the Milky Way through his telescope. She received her bachelor and master's degrees in music composition from Indiana University. As a professional composer, she integrates her connection between color and sound through synesthesia, which she'll be explaining. Joni's music has been performed worldwide and frequently features space-related themes, including works like Moonscape Awakening and Glow. Current commissions include performances at Carnegie Hall and collaborations with prominent artists. So please join me in welcoming Joni Greene. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you. All right, so I'm going to share this. Do our high fidelity music here. And looks like for video sharing, we're just going to try this. It's not letting me go. Okay. So, as a composer, I have multiple areas of inspiration. And for me, I've always had an interest in writing about nature, writing about the cosmos, just kind of concepts that might be harder to capture in music and sound. But because I have a special ability, you could say, which is synesthesia, which we'll talk about, I have an easier time with using imagery or imagery in nature, or just, in the cosmos and what I can see in general, and incorporating that into my music. So that's what we're going to delve into today. So yes, I am from Austin, Texas. That's where I live now with my 2 sons and my husband. And I am lucky that I can just write music full time. So I get to pick the projects that I work on. And my music is generally for acoustic instruments. So that's going to be basically something that's not electronic. So I write for all instrument types. I have a personal interest, I guess you could say, in concert music, in concert band music particularly, because I played in band when I was younger, and I like to be able to add a different variety of my repertoire to that genre for concert band music. I graduated from Indiana University, and I studied there under multiple talented composition faculty, which gave me a lot of variety for how I guess you could say, have pushed the boundaries of what I have learned as a composer, and have brought all of that into my work today as a professional composer. If I were to, in a nutshell, put the way that my music sounds or the style, I would say colorful, which we will discuss in greater depth, and how colorful can mean in a music sense, and then also from a synesthesia sense. I write a lot of melodic music, so that's going to be music that can be somewhat singable, we'll say, with main line of an idea, and can tell a story, which is going to be really helpful as we discuss physics and astrophysics and cosmology, and how to perceive the concept of those ideas in a musical way. And then tone and texture variation just means that I like to really play with different sounds. And when we play some examples today, I think you'll be able to hear that when we isolate those ideas. Yes, I've been performed internationally, and I have several pieces that I'm working on, such as the one suggested at one coming up for Carnegie Hall, and then another really exciting one for a concert band. We call it pocket opera. It'll be a small opera, and it'll be based on my ancestors, Hans and Sophie Scholl. So with that, thank you very much for having me today as your guest composer. Now, let's see, what is synesthesia? So synesthesia, in its most standard sense, is going to be the process when our senses can relate to each other, or one can trigger another. So it could be any of our senses, and in my case, that's going to be the process of when I hear sound, or a tone, or a pitch, or even an instrument. I will see a color. And this is a process that I have been discovering for, I mean, probably at least 20 years now. I had it early on, but I actually didn't even know what synesthesia was at the time. And then I heard about it and then started just thinking about it and then noticing over time that, wow, I really have this aura kind of come about me when I imagine an instrument sound or hear that sound. Now, I do a lot of my composing on the piano. So with that, I will get a much different sound on the piano, let's say, than if I have written something for a larger ensemble, such as an orchestra. And when I'm writing for an orchestra, I'm going to have the full gamut of instruments to choose from. So that's going to be, your higher woodwinds, brass, percussion, strings. So I have this nice big bank of instruments to choose from. And why this is unique is because with my synesthesia, I've been able to adapt it so that if I am working on the piano and I hear a pitch or, a specific note, let's say on the piano, then I might imagine it in another instrument. So I know as I'm writing on the piano that I'm going to go and I'm going to do what we call orchestrate. And that's where we take an idea, which might just be simple from the piano, and then put it into a full musical score of let's say 32 instruments in this case. So as I'm writing the piece, I am hearing what instrument will be playing what I'm working on the piano. And during this process, I am seeing colors as I am hearing pitches, either in my head, imagining them, or playing them on the piano. And that's just it's a really nice process for me because it's just totally intuitive. I don't think about it. And so as I'm writing, I'll see these flashes of colors and I'll get this kind of aura around me. And I have pretty much a pretty set color palette. So let's look here at chromesthesia. So chromesthesia is a little bit different in that it's just specifically talking about sound and color. So while we can have a blend of senses with synesthesia, which perhaps we could talk about feeling a certain way when you see a color, chromesthesia is specifically for those tone colors and pitches or notes and seeing a color. For me, I have worked with this process so long that I can see it in reverse. So I can see the color first and imagine how it should sound. So I kind of have this process of going back and forth between sound and color. So overall, this process, this compositional process, has really found its way into all of my music. I've always enjoyed bringing out what I would say to players when I would meet with ensembles, their tone color. And so that means if anyone's played an instrument, let's say you play clarinet, then the sound of your instrument might be a little bit richer because it's a woodwind. It might be a little bit darker, let's say, than a flute, which is has a metal. It's a metal instrument. It's used just with wind. We don't have a reed, and it tends to be airier. And then the higher in the range it goes, it can be brighter. It can be more shrill. And so what I end up getting is this color spectrum. And so with this color spectrum for the instruments, it stays pretty similar. So flutes are going to be anywhere from white to yellows, although they have the ability, depending on how they're playing, to be in the blue category. And then as I move down through the ensemble, I work my way through purples and then into a lot of the warmer colors. So that's going to be different blends of yellow and oranges, and then getting kind of into a red at the deepest, richest warmth. So that is the concept of synesthesia, and we'll kind of touch back on that a little bit as we look at some examples. So my first piece that I'd like to discuss today is called Suspended in a Sunbeam. And some of you may already recognize that title. That comes from The Cosmos from Carl Sagan. And I'll show you exactly where that came from in a minute. But I wrote this piece in 2021. It was a commission from the Nebraska Bandmasters Association. So the state of Nebraska contacted me and asked me to write them a piece. My father had been really ill for, let's just say 5 years prior to 2021. And during that time, I slowly got to the point where I wasn't able to write any more music just because of my concentration on him and his health and spending as much time with him as possible. And so when he passed away in August of 2021, I was totally focused on grief for him. And one of the things we may not realize with composers is that there is a very strong integration between our emotions and our ability to write music. And sometimes, the emotions can be so strong, it can feel like bottled up and difficult to get that out. Well, my father and I had a love of the cosmos. He had a master's in physics and had one of the really huge telescopes from the 1980s. And he shared that with me at a young age. And so I had this early love of just looking at the stars, imagining what was out there. And soon I was able to understand the concept of the cosmos by Carl Sagan. I watched the video series with him, and that's something that was really special between us. So this piece is takes its inspiration, yes, from what's going on in the cosmos, and definitely has an astrophysics and physics perspective, which we'll talk about in a minute. But really, it was that connection with my father. So the big, I would say, catalyst for starting this piece was when I heard about the James Webb Telescope, which launched in December on Christmas Day 2025. And sorry, I'm just making sure my sound's off, which is great. Okay, so it launched, and then when I heard about it launching in December, I just had this burst of inspiration and desire to connect with my father, who I knew would have loved this. So I started researching the James Webb Telescope. I knew I was going to write a piece about its launch and how it progressed towards we can say its final exploration. So first, I would like to share with you a quote I love, and some of you may have seen this before, from Carl Sagan's Cosmos. And this is really where I got the idea for the piece and the title. So look again at that dot. That's here, that's home, that's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you have ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, superstar, supreme leader, saint and sinner in the history of our species lived here on a mote of dust suspended in the sunbeam. And I got to that final concept of us being, this very speck in the cosmos, and we're just suspended in our sun, suspended in our galaxy. And I felt like this would be the perfect way to illustrate the idea of the James Webb Telescope departing Earth and reaching its launch point. So that's where that came from. So what is the James Webb Telescope? The James Webb Telescope is our largest current observatory. It is a telescope, but it's also an observatory because it can point to different places in the galaxy. And it uses a different type of light. So generally with the telescopes we've had like Hubble, we can have disturbances of gases and other materials that make it difficult for the light to penetrate. And so using infrared, it's able to see farther out and more clearly at different objects. So with the James Webb Telescope, we've had two main goals set by NASA. And the first was, hey, how far back can we see in the early universe? And Hubble has a picture here, very similar. It's just less crisp. And if you compare the two, you'll see that the colors are a little bit more faded and we kind of lose, let's say, like if we had the density of the background, we may not be able to see those. But because of the way James Webb detects light, we're able to see all of these beautiful galaxies as far back to what we perceive as the beginning of the early universe. So that was one of the goals. The other goal, among many, was the TRAPPIST-1 system. So the TRAPPIST-1 system is special in that it is only 40 light years from us. We have been watching it for decades. It has been spotted by ground telescopes, including smaller telescopes, the Spitzer telescope, and now the James Webb Telescope. And so we've known that this neighboring system solar system has 7 planets. And among those 7 planets, we believe that there are 3, what we call the Goldilocks zone. And in there could be habitable planets that if we had spaceships that could travel faster than the speed of light, maybe we could all pack up and go there and rehabitate. But for now, we are learning about the different planets and what those atmospheres are like. So for Suspended in a Sunbeam, I wanted to not only follow the series of its events from when it launched, but I also wanted to bring in these physics concepts because I am going to be having this piece for concert band, which means it's going to be for middle school and high school and universities. Mostly it will be high schools and universities, depending on the strength of the program. And with that, I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to introduce these ideas of physics into a piece of music? So when I'm composing, I'm thinking about all these physics properties. I'm thinking about what is causing, the rocket to start. What is thrust? What is the force and the requirements for thrust? What happens when we have liftoff? What happens when, we're airborne? So all these kind of physics principles that I had come to understand throughout my life, I wanted to share with other musicians. By doing this, these musicians can integrate a concept or a story, and as they're playing the piece, they have notes in their music, and it has little circles with a event sheet that they can refer to, so they can see what is it the composer is thinking, how is the composer interpreting these musical ideas, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So I'm going to play an example for you of the beginning of Suspended in a Sunbeam, and this is the launch sequence, okay? And let's see if we can all hear this. Okay, so with that, we are able to imagine what a liftoff sequence, launch and liftoff sequence might look like. And so we're getting that rumbling of the rocket, and we're getting that whole process of the countdown and then to final liftoff of the rocket. So a couple things with the synesthesia here. Again, I use those ideas and those concepts of the colors of the instrument. I was seeing color as I'm doing this and using that spectrum. I'm also using the inspiration from physics and the process of these events that are given at each stage throughout the piece. So now here's an example of what players get and also audience members, which we call program notes. And I'm not going to read all this. I just want to show you just how it is laid out. So I start with this is the actual facts. This is the actual science in real time. Of course, the piece isn't 30 days to its Lagrange 2 point, which is where James Webb Telescope finally settles. But we get the idea of the sequence of events. So we're starting with the very beginning, the escape velocity needed to leave the Earth's atmosphere, and then what's happening at 33 minutes, what's happening at a day, etc., all the way until 30 days when it reaches its final resting point at the Lagrange 2 point, 1,000,000 miles from Earth. So what I have done to offer an even more integrated opportunity for performance is I've created a video. So we're going to watch just the beginning of that launch sequence. I also want to add real quick right here, this is NASA's video that I have used. It shows you the information of the telescope as it's coming out of that orbit. And this is with my music behind it. So, are we able to just do a quick look, and was everyone able to see that and hear that okay? Great. Okay, so after we know now, especially 4 years later, that James Webb Telescope did make it to Lagrange 2 point, and we've had a lot of wonderful images come out and a lot of discoveries come out about that observatory. Now, as I mentioned before, one of the other goals was the TRAPPIST-1 system, particularly those possible inner planets that were in the maybe the habitable zone for an atmosphere that might support life. So in this piece, I had written it before we've had the time for James Webb Telescope to explore the TRAPPIST-1 system. And in fact, we've only had a little exploration so far. Scientists have to reserve the time with the James Webb Telescope. And so TRAPPIST-1 has had, they've had one viewing so far, and there is another one planned for this year. And hopefully we will get more answers about the different planets. So what is the TRAPPIST-1 system? So it is one of the closest systems nearest 40 light years away. And it is a series of 7 planets, as I mentioned. And for the story, the narrative of this piece, I wanted to have an idea that the telescope has now pointed towards TRAPPIST-1, and we're going to look at 3 planets. We're going to start with the outermost planet, the one farthest from its sun, and this planet is going to be the ice planet. Because it is the farthest from the sun, the idea here is that it would be the coldest most likely, and ice would be on its surface. So in order to get this imagery, I decided that I would use colors in the blue section of my synesthesia or chromesthesia. And I would also use some bright, brilliant yellows. So this is something that I can do to evoke the idea of a cold planet. And again, this is imaginary, so there's really nothing, at this point, as far as an artistic, integrity of the piece. I get to make those choices, which is wonderful. And we'll see if it comes out with something different. It'll be interesting how this piece develops. But for now, we have started at the ice planet. So I want to just play you what that sounds like, how ice and a planet on the very edge of its solar system. How could that sound in music? Let's see. So, as you can see from this rendering here by NASA, we have our 7 planets. And so we're talking about this one over here, the H planet, the ice planet. And so you may be able to recognize that we have layers happening. And as a composer, the way I approach writing is I really think of it as a roadmap first. So I'll have what I call form, and that tells me how am I going to get to A to B to C, etc., these events in the piece. So at this point, the event is exploring the ice planet. So how am I going to evoke ice? We can imagine what a planet might look like. We can imagine what ice on a surface might look like. And so how am I going to make this, as a composer, how am I going to express this? So for me, the first thing is ice to me feels white or blue. And with that aura, I could actually even feel almost this coldness. And this dryness, and perhaps even almost like this observatory effect. You can, to me anyway, when I hear this part of the music, it's like this, I'm observing this whole, this whole planet as a bird's eye view, if you will. And so it has this mysterious sound. It has this otherworldly sound. But what really brings in our attention is going to be those high sounds. That's going to be the flutes primarily, and then also metallics. Metallics are great for bringing out these kind of different brilliant sounds. And metallics are found in the percussion family. So percussion instruments that I might have used here would be different types of metal plates. We have little discs that we use that ring really brightly, just kind of giving this sheerness to the sound. So on top, we have that concept of this moving da 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 da. So that idea is I would call the melodic idea. And then below that, I have these staggered entrances in the rest of the ensemble, and that's just giving warmth. That's giving kind of this foundation so that we have these 2 large concepts happening, kind of similar if you have studied music to a melody and a harmony. So with that, we have, let's see, just a few minutes. And so I would like to see if we have any questions at this point. If we have a little time, I do have another excerpt we can discuss, but if we don't get to it, that's just fine.
Right. I can start us off with some questions, although I definitely want to hear what you were talking about. Did you want to do that first, or did you want to wait and see if...
We can. I just wanted to, I know sometimes it can be hard to hold on to a question about multiple pieces, but if everyone feels okay, if they have questions up to this point, I don't mind playing the next excerpt. That way we can combine the questions. So we'll just do that for a couple minutes. So the next piece is called Event Horizon. Event Horizon came to fruition in 2013. And for me, I wanted to explore the process of a supernova and how would that look compositionally. How am I going to take this concept of something that's happening very far away and has a cycle, a cycle and a star death with multiple processes going on. And if you can see this lovely image here, how that might look using imagery here again as inspiration. So with these colors, of course, we have given these colors from the image that was taken. And so just using these colors, I am approaching the writing with the chromaesthesia with the color choices with the instruments that match to that. So one of the main areas for obviously a supernova is going to be fusion. So with fusion, we have our process of moving through lighter to heavier elements. And as these elements cycle, we get more chaotic and abrupt ideas in the music. And when we finally hit the point of explosion, we've come to our final iron core heaviness, let's say, and we have gravity overtaken. And finally, we have this explosion. So I'm sure some of you are very familiar with this process. This is the working concept that I used to work on my events, my sequence of events. And so using these ideas, I decided to assign characters in this section of the piece. So I have this back and forth going on. It's like a conversation of sorts between the instruments, and they are illustrating these different elements. And as things cycle, you have some parts of the ensemble playing an idea, and then you can hear it getting thicker and heavier and louder as we get to these heavier elements. And then there's a surprise that I'll leave for you at the actual explosion point, which may surprise some of you of how I went about that. So let's hear this excerpt of the process of fusion to our supernova. Now, on my end for that recording, I actually couldn't hear the instrument that's used right at the point of the explosion. So some of you may have heard it. It's soft. Some of these concert recordings, it can be a little challenging to get enough volume. But if you were to hear the piece, and hopefully you were able to hear some of this, there was that kind of that gap at the end where we heard all that chaos going back and forth. And if you were able to hear, there was a high-pitched metal sound. Okay, great. I'm glad some of you could hear it. And what that is that's a crotale, and that's a special effect where they take a bow for a stringed instrument and a metal disc, and they slide it along that disc. And I decided for musical choice as a contrast, wouldn't it be interesting to have something that has just like a totally different sound? We have all this large chaotic sounds, and then we're just going to have this piercing sound. It's also the idea that when we imagine seeing a supernova and we see that explosion, it's almost like we have no idea what that might sound like, and it might be extremely loud. And I could have gone more and more into the chaotic zone, but I thought maybe artistically it would make more sense that we just get this piercing sound when we finally get that explosion. So if you're interested in hearing any of these pieces in further detail, you can go to my website, which is just my name, jonigreene.com. You can hear the rest of this piece. It finally ends up taking its way towards a black hole and crossing over the event horizon, and it has a more of a floaty feel as we start to dissipate all the sounds into nothing. So that is event horizon.
All right. Thank you very much. Oh, I didn't mean to cut off the music.
No,
Was
no, that was it.
I had this moment of, oh no. No, that was really cool. And one of the things it reminded me of how you got it, that kind of gap that you described, it reminded me a lot of the idea that sound travels much more slowly than light. So I sort of imagined the light in that moment and it being silent because you wouldn't hear it yet. So
Right, exactly.
I thought that was really, really interesting. Got a few questions. So let me go in and take a look. Have you, at this point, collaborated with any astronomers or physicists when creating your music?
So during the actual creation process, some of my more recent pieces, I definitely have. I have stayed in touch with my 10th and 11th and 12th grade physics teacher, and he lives nearby. So when I was writing Suspended in a Sunbeam, he and I met and discussed all the actual events to make sure my physics was correct. Since I'm going to be presenting it as a physics lesson, I need to make sure I'm teaching the correct things. And also with Event Horizon, there was a performance, I believe it was 2 years ago. It was with a university, and they actually had a astrophysicist at the university who had helped discover the event horizon. And so just real quickly, the tracking down the event horizon, there were several very large telescopes they used, and in combination all together, and he was a big part of spearheading that project. So he came to the concert, and he and I was on Zoom, and he was on stage, and we had a discussion about the process of the supernova and just fusion in general, and his discovery of the event horizon. So in that respect, that was definitely unique, and I think special to be able to collaborate with another scientist.
Question from me. I recall during the total solar eclipse in April that you were almost like composing in your head while you were watching it. Could you talk a little bit about how okay, I understand what synesthesia is, and I'm a little familiar with it just my own self, but you mentioned colors and sounds, but are there instruments involved? Like, are there instruments that work with certain colors? Or so if you could describe that process of looking at that eclipse and what you were experiencing.
So if we were to say as like a structural element, part of my synesthesia that doesn't change, I have a color spectrum that can be used in different ways. And one of those ways is, yes, by attaching it to specific instruments. So if I have like white, if I'm like a rainbow almost, and I've got the white and the yellow shades, these brighter, higher instruments would have those. And then for me, like brass instruments in particular would be in the oranges and so on. So I do have specific instruments that are assigned to that. Now, because I've gotten so comfortable with this process of hearing sound and then seeing color, I've been able to do the opposite. So when we saw the eclipse, I was really struck by, of course, the actual blue, this really beautiful light blue color that we got, and then this white ring of, around the eclipse of the sun. And so I had these concepts going on as far as color there, but then we had the atmosphere. We could say the better word would be just the nature, the landscape around us, and how that dimming of light gave this very like dusky kind of feel. And so I was able to use this whole shading, I would say, in the blue spectrum. And so as I was seeing these colors, I was thinking, how would this sound? And at the same time, I was thinking as a process, how would I go about using two objects, one, the sun, that would be brilliant and bright to start with, which would definitely be in the yellow, bright yellow and warm categories. So I'd be using all of my higher, I'd be using metallic percussions, I'd be using flute, I'd be using oboe, which is a higher instrument, I'd be using trumpet, which is really bright, and metallic. And so I'd be using these instruments that are going to be golden and just very intense from let's say, a light perspective. And then I'm imagining this process as we have the moon, and how is the object of the moon as it overlaps, how is that color of the moon going to slowly move, and then we get this blending effect, right? So we have one color of the sun and one color of the moon, and then it's going to be darker, it's going to be richer, it's going to be heavier. Because I feel like, not to say the sun's not heavy, but, I just have this feeling of weight with the rock, with the moon. So I'll use these different concepts to think about how that could sound using instruments and just different techniques of how they're playing. And so these two color spectrums, if you will, the yellows and these darker, maybe some purples in my mind, heavier instruments, lower brass and reeds and stuff. And then how is that going to blend? So I might have some flute ideas here, and then I might have, let's say, bassoons over here. And then the way that they blend, they might start separate lines. You hear one, then you hear the other. And then as they come together, you mix them. And then you might just end up with no more of that bright yellow, because now we have those darker colors of the moon.
Interesting process. I do remember you talking about the trumpets at the time, I think. And I was trying to figure out what you meant, but this really clarifies it. Let's see, another question. Let me take a look. Are there any upcoming space missions or discoveries that are inspiring new compositions?
Yes. So I read articles every day. That's kind of like and in this crowd, I'm not a nerd doing this, but I read lots of different articles on physics and astrophysics and what's going on in the cosmos. And so I have a whole series based on the James Webb Telescope images. And so I have written a piece called Afterglow, which is based on the deep field picture, which is going to be as far as we can see so far in the universe. And so that piece is just about like early galaxy formation. And then I wrote a piece for middle school called Shattering Stars, which is a similar idea of the supernova, but on a smaller scale. Upcoming projects, the Nancy Grace is another telescope that we have coming out in several years. It's in early production, and this telescope is really interesting. It's going to not be an observatory. It's going to look at space from a different lens, if you will. And so as we get closer to the launch and goals of this telescope, I think it would be exciting kind of just to have a different portrayal of what we're seeing through this telescope. I have ideas constantly, though, about, as we learn more about each galaxy, all these interesting galaxies that we're finding more, and like the different types of galaxies, and like the thin razor line galaxies, and then we've got this one black hole that is speeding through the universe, and as it's going, it is splitting all of the galaxies as it goes, the gases and the different elements of these galaxies. And what's happening is, instead of going into the black hole, it's kind of attaching itself to the back. And so there's this huge tail it's like incomparable how long this tail is as far as light years. So this piece is called splitting light. And it's the idea that you have this black hole going and then it's splitting all this light and then it's going and making this tail. So I have some ideas for how this would sound, but it's almost like a shooting star, but it's a shooting black hole, if you will.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard of that. I'm looking forward to hearing that composition, and I want to thank you very much for being with us here at Roger That.
Thank you.
And people will check out your website. Oh, there's one more question. It sounds like, okay, this will be the last one. It sounds like astrophysics speaks to you a lot more loudly than planetary science. Is there anything that animates that?
Um, well, I would say that probably just my upbringing with trying to. I wish, I feel like as far as like the mathematics side of physics, I'm a little bit shortchanged. So I just find it very interesting to learn about these principles and concepts, and especially how it plays into the creation of our universe. And of course, our theories and then debunking these theories. And I've just always, I guess maybe also because of the cosmos and how we go on this journey with Carl Sagan of what could be out there. What are our different options of what's out there, and how did we get to this point? And I think that probably goes back just to the relationship I had with my father and him being a physicist. And then I spent a while learning physics and enjoying it. And if I never took calculus, but maybe if I had, then I would be even more up to date on my physics. But yeah, it's just something that I think comes from that relationship with my father.
On that note, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciated it, and will be looking forward to your new compositions. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody else, we're going to start up again with Barbara Brennan at 2:30, and so we'll take a little break between now and then. Thank you.